Hey Barrett,
Hey, how's it going?
good. We're early.
Yeah, I know. Huh.
That's cool. So
Okay.
we are recording now.
Okay, great. Who else is joining?
Davor
Oh,
and
nice. Great.
TJ. He said he'd be a little bit late.
Hmm.
So I those I don't know if Marco's going to come or not.
Okay.
Doug is not going to be here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he told me to call him if we had any trouble. He had something he had to do with his family.
Oh, okay. Oh, man.
So anyway, here we are.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted just sort of a preliminary discussion to our discussion as we wait for new people to come on. Um, I was just appreciating the message that you left. You were talking about, I'm quoting you here, one of the key aspects of second order culture is that it gives me hope for emerging subjectivities, new politics, new music, etc.
Yeah.
And also, maybe we'll get a chance to talk about this later because this interests me as well. And I think this overlaps a lot with some of Davor's interests. You talk about the left conservatism,
Yeah.
and you say they can never really escape the precondition which they themselves want to escape. And so you get this sort of left conservatism. It yearns for a new world, a new modality, but doesn't have all the tools or imagination to get there.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very interesting, and that uh, sort of captures some of my own dilemmas, actually,
Yeah.
because I'm in the middle of that myself. I mean, we're all in these transitions,
Yeah.
this phase space, and it's getting very intense. And every day, it seems like I'm overwhelmed by all these mixed messages, and I'm trying to sort them out. And I'm all into the new music and the new art and those new subjectivities and the new intersubjective spaces that are starting to emerge
Yeah.
through our participation. It won't happen without our participation. So I think this is what we're trying to do here, is to use this technology, which is quite magical in some ways, and to subvert it somehow for our own purposes rather than just to be used by the
Yeah.
technology. So I think that's our challenge. But anyway, I wanted to just discuss, I went over the paper again today, um, distributing potentialities.
Yeah.
I made a few more notes and give Davor plenty of space to elaborate because we did present this at a cafe, and there was a lively discussion around it. And in the most recent cafe, and I think you were there,
Yeah, I was there.
we elaborated even more on this, some of the themes. So, so I just want to invite us to think about where we want to start and go from there. And I think we have one more minute before 8 o'clock, so I'm expecting some more people here.
Yeah. That sounds great. I think this is kind of one of the things that really drew me in while I was actually taking layers of generativity with Davor, is that he seems to think that, as I actually believe as well, that there is, a little bit of like an intermediate subjective dilemma that we're sort of facing right now as we're going through this transition. And a lot of people, I think, have sort of, in order to kind of, I think one of the big dilemmas we're facing is just a basic lack of a true belief. And I think people are trying to find that in these very kind of constrictive ways. And what they don't sort of give credence to is the fact that maybe they have been socialized in this era of post-modernity or whatever, post-industrialization or whatever, to the point where it's like, I would almost say one of the things I think about often is that, you know, kind of like the paramount symbol to me of postmodernism is like somebody, you know, pantomiming some sort of like position of the past, like Maoism or something like that, you know, just because.
Hey, Davor.
Oh, hey,
okay.
hey, how's it going? Good to
Good.
see you.
Thanks.
Sorry, I got off track because it's you know, kind of resurrecting dead ideology for affect, you know, kind of thing. And I think we're seeing a lot of that. I think we're seeing a lot of people who are like, oh, this institution that meant this thing is failing, therefore it's like always we have to save this. It's never why can't we just let this go? Why can't, you know, because if we look at you know, this kind of civilizational shift that we're in, and if we look at them in the past, there is a disintegration of these structures and subjectivities that's natural. And instead of, you know, letting some of these go, people are really holding on to these ideas of you know, whether it be sort of like identity or it be, you know, forms of, you know, social organization. And I think we're kind of seeing all of these things, you know, dissipate a little bit, or at least mutate. We're seeing sort of like a civilizational mutation. And I think people are genuinely afraid of that. So that's where I kind of say, you know, the kind of postmodernists.
Yes,
You know?
I love that.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
And I hope we go more into that because I really resonate with that a lot. And Davor, thank you once again. It must be really late there.
Yeah.
No.
1 o'clock. Oh, I have no idea. I have no idea why we scheduled it this late. But I really appreciate your dedication and showing up.
Yeah.
I wanted to. We may have our friend TJ joining us, and he's the sort of history buff. So I really wanted him to be here. He said he'd be running a little bit late.
Okay.
And I just want to quote you, if I may, from the thread. I thought this was interesting. You say, "It is such a strange and peculiarly uplifting feeling to see people discussing ideas that previously were only in my own head, and that with such rigor and interest." And then you go on to say, "I was wondering if I could join your sessions and introduce the whole idea shortly in my own words and point you directly to the parts that seem to be interesting for you from my perspective." So I think this is great that you gave us some feedback on our feedback, and we can continue to go in that direction and give you plenty of time to develop a response here. So I would just like to, is TJ, is that you, TJ? Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see you.
I know, so I'm fighting with this thing. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, so you're having a camera issue, but we can hear you fine.
Okay, great.
So welcome, TJ. You were at the previous discussion that we had at the cafe. So you're familiar with Davor's paper already, and we've already talked a little bit about it. So I just wanted to invite everyone to start wherever you want to start, okay? And we'll just, I like to use the metaphor for me of like a musician, like a jazz quartet, where I listen carefully and support everyone's solo, and then maybe have a solo of my own. But I'm open to anyone else's metaphor too, whatever metaphor works for you. So thank you.
That's good.
Yeah, thanks. So is it up to me now again? All right. Looks like. Okay, Lister, I just have to say something first. We have a problem today again. I got sick, so my voice is not good, you know, let's say like this, and my head is a little bit mushy. Just a normal cold, but I don't feel well. So let's see how far I can get with but it's a good.
Whenever you get tired, just let us know.
No, I'm
okay.
not tired. It's more like it's a good thing, you know. It kind of stops me from having monologues, I think. So it's a good thing to be sick. So okay, so who is here now? Today is Barrett. Hi, Barrett, by the way. Barrett is here, John is here, and TJ.
And TJ's here, and we may be joined by, yeah, TJ's having camera difficulties.
Okay, and Doug maybe will come too, right, later.
Doug can't come. He had a family issue, but I'm hoping that we're going to, Marka might join us.
Okay, okay, let's see. Okay, so the idea of today was, as if I understood that correctly, to do what? To introduce again, as you said in the beginning, to introduce and a little bit quickly to say what the whole thing is about.
Yeah, in your words.
Yeah. Okay.
And in response to our response, you might want to elaborate a little bit. I know you saw a video of our cafe discussing your stuff. So if something came up from that cafe that you wanted to address, that would be cool too. So.
Yeah, if I remember. Let's see what's going to happen. Okay, so okay, all right. Then I give you just a small, simple introduction of this whole thing.
Please.
So the point is this. I think I said this before. So the reason why I started to develop this theory in general was that I'm not convinced of late modernity and of capitalism. Why? Because we are destroying the planet. Okay, so very simple. And even if you wouldn't destroy the planet, still it would be not the best system to live in, so to speak, right? Okay, but so the question was how to get out of the system and how to get out of the system very quick. Soon we need to get out of the system, right? And yeah, and just as Barrett just said like 5 minutes ago, why do the people not change? Why are we stuck with their subjectivities? Why do we keep up the system? Why do we keep up their beliefs? Because the beliefs and the subjects and the roles that the people are playing and so on, the way how they identify with with social roles and their constructs of themselves. These are the basic conditions, or how should I say, the supporters of the system. The system would change if the people would think differently, right? So if we wouldn't believe that profit is important, we would not care for profit, and then we would have different institutions. It's an easy thing. It's not that easy, but you understand what I'm saying. So it's all somehow connected, and so you can say that institutions and subjectivities and mentalities and types of cognition are somehow correlated, and also like technologies and media and economy and so on, where somehow there's some sort of correlation, and all together they form some sort of system. No, not some form, a system. A system means a system can be defined as several functional parts or parts which are functionally related to each other, right? And but in compared to a real machine, the parts of a society are not directly mechanically connected, right? So it's not like a machine, like a gearing of a car or something like this, right? So it's in other words, the machine is more or less a construct in the head of the people. So in other words, the people are reproducing the machine. The machine is not there. It's not just out there. It's in the people, right? And so the problem is only that once such a machine or such a virtual machine or such a social machine is established, it's very difficult to change it, right? Because then you have a system that started to reproduce itself, and it goes very deep down, as we just said, down to the identity itself. So if you want to change a system, can be as difficult as changing a person's mind about something, and this is very difficult, right? As we know, convincing somebody a communist of capitalism or a capitalist of communism is very difficult, right? So it's quite a task. Anyway, so the question is now, how do you get out of this so-called path dependency? So how do you change the system, although there is so much resistance on so many levels against this change of systems, right? It's not only the identities, it's not only the people themselves, it's also the functional, how should I say, the functional reciprocity of all the parts of the system. So in other words, if you would, for example, say, okay, let's close all banks or something like this. All the banks, just close them. It doesn't make sense because the whole system needs the banks to function, right? So you would take out a vital functional part, and then and the same goes for distribution, of goods and of nutrition of resources and so on. So in other words, there are many levels on which the systems are, how should I say, functionally sedimented or something, or crystallized. You know, like they are sedimented. It's difficult to get them out of this. Anyway, so the question was how to do that, and we know that it doesn't work with violence. For example, you know, just imagine, let's say even no matter which type of revolution, even a fascist revolution or a communist revolution in America is totally unthinkable, right? The continent is too big. Such a revolution which would start with violence wouldn't have any effect, basically. You know, it would cause a lot of problems, right? But it wouldn't change the whole system. Doesn't matter if it's left or right or whatever. So just as an example, so violence doesn't work. Obviously, from within the system, it doesn't happen. It must crash somehow, because otherwise people will still keep believing in it and so on. And okay, anyway, so the question was how to get out of this path dependency. And there is this theory of Heiner Mühlmann. I gave you the one short introduction of his book, Nature of Cultures, right? So this is just the introduction. The book gets more, you know, it gets more and more crazy, so to speak, but it's kind of an interesting idea. He's showing what the reason is why we get into these cultural path dependencies. Actually, I remember I gave you the small
Yes.
cutout of the yam root, right?
Yes.
Remember this story. So this is exactly path dependency, right? So how do you get the people out of this path dependency? And anyway, so he states in his theory, and it's again, it's not the truth. It's just a theory. It's just one take, you know, one way how to map a reality, so to speak, right? So it shows you some points, and it could be that you can use these points as a leverage point, so to speak. It could be. It's just a theory, right? It's a mapping, so to speak. You're just mapping it. And so anyway, in his theory, he states that cultures are. I'm getting pretty extensive here. Should I continue or
Yes, please.
monologue is okay? Anyway, so in his theory, he's stating. Simplified now, that cultures are forming based on a stress event. Okay, so just to give you an example, what do I mean with this? So you have a collective which has a clash, let's say, with another collective. And with clash, I mean like you know, war how to say, like a bellicose, you know, military, like an existential struggle with another collective, for example. Like it could be also a natural catastrophe or something like this. But let's say another collective. So you have two collectives which have war. Okay, simply war. And the one collective is so the one survives, right? And then you have this. So after so let's say like this. So you have this in the moment when the two collectives are clashing. You have this moment of maximal existential stress. So for everybody, right? So the picture that Mühlmann is using is imagine the Greek army when the phalanx is clashing against each other, right? You have to imagine you are in the front, just in the first row of the phalanx, and behind you there are 6 rows of strong men pushing you into the enemy, and you can't do anything against it. I mean, you have to stand your ground, so to speak, and at the same time, the spears and the enemy is coming in your direction, right? So this is a picture to imagine this maximum stress, right? So there's real existential stress which causes these death. How to say this fear of how to say flight or fear reactions? No, flight.
A flight or fight.
Yeah, flight or fight, exactly. So very, very deep, right? So I mean, very, very deep feeling. So it's like literally very deep. Your ratio is totally, you know, turned off. It's just you and life and death.
Survival.
Yeah. So okay. So this is so when he says now the following happens. So you have this event which he calls maximum stress event. Okay, and in this moment you have a certain type of cooperation in war. So you have, for example, the phalanx. In which every individual is facing maximum stress, but we still keep cooperating. Okay, so that's why his theory is called maximum stress cooperation theory. Okay, so maximum MSC theory, maximum stress cooperation theory. So now the point is this: the one collective survives, right? And then they start to relax. So they had this stress event, and then all of a sudden after they won, they start relaxing. They get into a post-stress phase. But they won. Okay, so it's not that they lost, they won. This is important because with the PTSD, with the post-traumatic syndrome. So these people were in stress, but they won. So that means their appraisal of the stress is totally different than if you lose, right? This is important to understand that. So they won. They go back into their collective. They go home, so to speak, right? After they leave the field of war, you know, and go home. And then in this post-stress phase, they think which strategy, which kind of cooperation was good and which was not good. You know, we start to reflect on what happened. How did we survive actually? You know, how did we get out of this post-stress phase, through this stress phase? How did we survive that? And at the same time, we also start thinking what kind of virtues and what kind of vices were good and what kind of vices and virtues were bad. For example, being bold, you know, or for example, being cool, you know, like standing in the front row and still staying cool, like how to say, like composed, you know what I'm saying, composed, or being rational or something like this. All right. So and this is now the theory of Mühlmann. You have this maximum stress events. Then you have the post-stress phase, and in the post-stress phase, you have a selection of certain values, of certain practices, of certain vices, and of certain virtues, right? Virtues, and these are being selected and developed during this stress phase. Okay. And so why? Because they prove themselves to be useful, you know, in this so to speak evolutionary clash. They show that they're useful, that you can use them, and then they get, so to speak, literally, how to say this, engraved into the minds of everybody who survived, right? So this is, and then all of a sudden you have a shift in the catalogs of virtue, so to speak. So something goes up, something goes down, you know, and this is then what happens. So now when the culture was very successful, so the culture wins against one collective, the culture wins against the next collective, and the next, you know, and it expands and expands and expands because of the selected practices and virtues, you know, it becomes more powerful, so to speak, and starts expanding. With time, it gets so successful that it doesn't have any enemy anymore. But the catalog of virtues and norms and what is considered as being good and bad, you know, and virtuous and the opposite of virtuous, is still kept in the culture and kept on reproducing, because this is the culture, right? Exactly these virtues, these practices, and these norms are being transmitted from generation to generation to generation. And the point is now they are being transmitted from generation to generation even without an enemy existing anymore. Yeah, makes sense so far?
Yes. Yes.
Right. So this is, yeah, please.
That makes a lot of sense. TJ, did you want to respond to that? Did you have a question or a comment?
Oh, no, it makes sense. It's we have post-stress is kind of like when the mythology enshrines what the culture is going to be about for the next phase.
He doesn't really talk about mythologies, but of course the mythologies are also the media for these values and norms, right?
Right. I mean, stemming from the event itself kind of feeds it, and the values that the culture,
Yeah, sorry, of course, yeah, the event itself can also
not necessarily stories of gods, but just the nation, the culture, the people.
Yeah, exactly. So you tell the story, exactly. It's a myth. You tell the story about this past, you know, how you won and stuff. Yeah,
gloriously won. And
yes. Yeah. Exactly. So this is how this is being I mean, again, I'm saying this is how this is being transmitted. It's the theory how this could be, you know, how this.
Right. One way of looking at it.
How this could work. Okay. So anyway, so the point is now this: the culture expands. It was successful, and one thing is important to mention. I wasn't totally correct when I said earlier that there is no enemy anymore. The opposite is true. You need, in every generation, you need one clash or even a simulation of a clash to re-actualize this memory, this cultural memory of these, you know, of the stress responses, so to speak, right? So you need, in other words, every generation needs a war to keep the culture tight and effective. You know, this is the theory of Mühlmann, basically. I mean, as I said, it's a good book. There's, I mean, at least an insightful book. There's much more to say about this. I'm simplifying in this moment. Okay. So, in other words, and what's now important about the book of Mühlmann, he wrote this in '96. I mean, I'm not so, in reality, I'm not so much referring to his book itself, me personally, because there are some problems, but I think it's a good entry point to understand the whole principle, the whole theory. That's why I'm talking about it. So he wrote this book, I think, in '96, and at this time, this was just after the Cold War, he believed that there could be some sort of, I don't know, global peace or something like this, that we could overcome this cultural, yeah, he calls it the cultural narcissism. So when once such a culture is established, it is blind. It's blind in its narcissism. It wants to repeat and reproduce itself all the time, so to speak. So it's like a narcissistic organism, the culture. And he thought that maybe in the '90s he believed that it could be that you could pacify the whole world by exposing these cultural narcissisms, by enlightening people. Look, you are just reacting to your stresses. You know, you're just a stress response mechanism, so to speak, right? So in the '90s, he believed this. Then later in 2011, he again how to say in English, reissued or republished the book, but changed it a little bit. And then he said he doesn't believe it anymore. He thinks that it's impossible because even the new culture again would be a stress culture. It has always to be a stress culture. You cannot get rid of the narcissism because this is a basic mechanism of cultures themselves, right? You cannot have just pure peace or freedom or whatever it is. It is always based on these. Anyway, so what he proposed in his book was that you can look at these stages of the development of culture. As I said, the maximal stress, the first phase, and then the formation phase, you know, and then the repetition and reproduction phase, and then what was it again? Like the fourth phase was like maintenance phase or something like this, and then the fifth phase was the erosion phase. You know, when things erode. And what his idea was, once you understand cultures in this way, and if you want to tame this narcissistic being, this culture, and this is also important. I think he said this also in the introduction, that it's about taming the culture, because it's like an animal, and we didn't tame it yet, so to speak. Humans didn't tame this animal. If you want to tame it, then he gives you 5 ways in each phase of these stages. You have, so to speak, how to say this, a leverage point or an entry point or something to change something, you know, so you can cut off the mechanism of self-reproduction. Yeah. Anyway, so if you apply this theory to capitalism, and it's not so difficult to do that, right? I mean, just think about one thing. Just think about, for example, 9/11. I remember in the year 2000, there was the Hollywood movie about Pearl Harbor, I think with Ben Affleck or whatever it was. It was like very hyped. Yeah, and it was very hyped, and I was wondering why do we hype this movie so much, right? And what is it? Nothing. It's just a reactualization of the attack of Pearl Harbor. Remember, you know what I'm saying? To put tension, to electrify, how to say this, you know, the population of America, so to speak, you know, to make them not remember. So this is exactly the mythologies that TJ was speaking before that, right? So you have these narratives which are constantly being repeated, and in that case, it's Hollywood that constantly, you know, pumps the minds of the Americans, you know, injects constantly the memory of stress events, right? So this is what's happening. I mean, many other things are happening too, but this is one thing how you can see it and how these things are happening, and or how you can interpret these things. So in other words, yeah, and you can see that. So in the moment when America stopped having a war in every generation, you have a decay. You know, you have Generation X, for example, or whatever. You know, you see my point. So in the moment when you don't have constantly an attack from the outside, you have people questioning being whatever conservative and so on. You know, so in this then the culture falls apart. Right? People are deviating from the core values at the very core. You know, that needs to be reproduced all the time. So to keep the culture alive. Yeah, I'm repeating here also. Mühlmann, he also said this is in the 4th phase, that you have a degeneration, basically. So you have a certain part of the population is sort of degenerating from the core values because there is no outside pressure that keeps them in line, basically, right? Keeps us in line. it's not necessary. But you can imagine it very easy. If tomorrow a war would start, right? So you could, of course, stay peaceful, but that means you will die, or you will simply do what you have to do and survive, right? So what I'm saying is, we have this luxury not to think about this, but right now, not to be part of this hardcore values, but the hardcore values can come back very fast. You know what I'm saying?
Sure can.
It's just the same thing. Like I'm always saying when somebody tells me that he's no subject, he's a construct or something like this, I'm saying, yeah, you are a subject. The next time you have tooth pain, then you will become a subject. Yeah, it's easy, right?
Yeah, absolutely right.
So
Interestingly,
we see a lot of that right now.
I have a personal anecdote after 9/11. I worked for a museum downtown Manhattan, not far at all from the tower that went down. Both towers went down, and I live in the neighborhood too. But I remember about 4 days after that event, I went into the office, and I noticed as I went up and down the street, just about every building had an American flag posted on the window, on the fire escape in front of the office building. And I went into my place of business, and everyone just was sort of like in a state of as like zombies, didn't know exactly what to do. And I found a flag. I found an American flag in a magazine, and I tore it out and I pasted it on the window of the store where I was working. And it did, strangely enough, create a comfort zone for people. It's like a security blanket. And for a couple of months, for a couple of weeks, I remember just seeing all these American flags actually moved me to tears, which but before this event, I could have cared less about the American flag. And and now, of course, I don't care about the American flag either, but there was a moment where when people are very traumatized, they will collapse, I think, to a previous structure. And it takes them a while to come back to where they were. Some people never come back. But I think that, so I'm just resonating with that post-traumatic stress. And as you were saying, even winners in these conflicts have post-traumatic, kind of a form of post-traumatic stress. And when they reflect upon their behavior while they were in that battle, and they look at the virtues and the vices, and then they start to practice that, even though there's no conflict. So they can still act like good little soldiers, even though, and my father was a lieutenant in the Army. He was also a drill sergeant. And he got out of the Army, but he still acted just like he was in the military with all of his kids and his wife, and he would have these flashbacks where he would just be performing in that virtuous military kind of mode. So people's identities do get very hooked around these traumatic episodes. And I think those structures, if they're regressive, are very hard to, it's hard to restabilize in a more sophisticated way that isn't driven by these tribal or geopolitical states manufacturing these pseudo alarms. And of course, that's what happened, the status quo in the United States. You know, you had this incredible conservative takeover, basically. And it's hard to imagine how we're trying to still dig ourselves out of that, I think. TJ comes from...
that speaks...
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, and yet you couldn't find an American flag for like a week and a half after that, no matter where you looked, because, people kind of, identified it in just the way you said. But I think to Millman's point, though, it's interesting how quickly that kind of faded. Like World War II set an entire generation because it kind of spoke to the mythology. That's why I kept coming back to mythology. World War II, we were the good guys. It tied us back into all, wonderful, glorious deeds of the founding fathers, all the way up. 9/11, again, we were the victims, so we were the good guys. But the war in Vietnam before that and the war in Iraq didn't really unify people in the same way.
That's right.
And I'm wondering if the different narratives and, at play there. Whereas Melman is saying he's really tying this major stress building event that defines us, but in a mythological way, we have to really keep coming back to that instead of some new adventure or some new, politician deciding that, well, there's weapons there, we have to hunt for them. That doesn't kind of bring the people together in the same way.
Yeah, because Vietnam and Iraq was not an attack on America, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's maybe the difference, one of the differences. Yeah.
But one of the things that I find interesting, when you talk about how you can sort of garner some sort of, collective interest to actually like mobilize and do something if you're somehow, the victim. And I don't want to sound like, too much of like a Foucault kind of person who's sort of like denying the function of power in the world. But, I think one of the things actually that's interesting is like this notion of victimhood today is basically being merged into a function of bourgeois corporatism, which is what I'm talking about, this kind of what I call sort of like the conservative left. In that, so there's this kind of, I think there's a little bit of a fable and a problem here, in that there's very much a sort of like a regressive kind of, I would almost say, postmodernist construct that they just kind of, because we're being socialized in this day and age, and contemporary capitalism has a lot to do with it. Like, I'm not going to say, I'm not one of those people who's like, okay, this situation that we found ourselves in wasn't, partially composed of the system that we have, that we all kind of live in, that we share today. But I think it's just kind of interesting that, people are sort of yearning. There's like a yearning for a powerless world, but a world devoid of power and is utterly incoherent, and I think this is kind of the issue. And so we actually see people in this sort of pursuit of powerlessness. You almost see this sort of reversal or the shifting of powers, of the dynamics of power and the dynamics of control through socialization that actually doesn't really change. And a lot of that has to do with, again, like you said, it's like, how do we move beyond this system that we have now? It's like, obviously we can't go back to these old functioning systems. It's like, for everybody who, like, let's take the ethical argument out of fascism. It's a horrible, as a utilitarian, politically functioning system, it's a horrible system. It doesn't work. It has a shelf life of 10, 15 years at most. I mean, it's just a stupid idea. I mean, this is not the way the world works, So I think we have to, but I do see that there is a need to move beyond these things, because, like, when people, I can sit here and say, oh, late capitalism like everybody else. And then they're like, oh, well, I want to make all universities free. And I'm like, well, I want to move beyond all that, because these things are not necessarily, there are some things that we just can't, especially in the United States, there are some institutions we just can't keep alive. We just can't keep these things alive. I mean, they're outliving their usefulness, and I think people are kind of, so how do we, there's the materialist argument, the sort of like hardcore kind of Marxist, historical Marxism that's about, you absolutely change the material conditions before you change anything. And I agree that some material shift needs to happen, but it doesn't have to be the right one. There's always this idea that in order for history to progress, the present must be perfect. All the stars have to be aligned right now, or things can't change for the better. And I'm sitting here thinking, wait, that's not how the world works. Like, I think Henry Poincaré.
It's never how it works.
It's never how things work. I mean, we go through periods of low and high entropy. Like, entropy doesn't just merely increase as time and space increases. Like, we go through periods of low and high entropy in different temporal fields.
Mm.
So we can't necessarily, and this is one of the problems that I have with the kind of like hardline materialist view of things, is that we really do need a metaphysical change. Like these things and the material conditions that bring this about, they can be messy. They don't have to look perfect. In fact, they should not look perfect.
Mm.
You know, in fact, that, you know, because, and we should expect that they won't, you know.
Can I say something? You know, it exactly you know, follows up on what you say. It also goes back to Mühlmann in that sense.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is this: what people don't understand, and I totally agree, is that you cannot have a revolution from one day to the next, so to speak.
No.
Like everything will be fine, and you know, you change everything from one day to the next, and then the world will be a new world, so to speak. But why do people believe that? It's a religion, basically. You know, it's there is some sort of opiate feeling at the end of the tunnel. You know what I'm saying? That means on the next day after the revolution, right? And so this and this feeling is called, or you can call it. There's a certain term for this. This is called Pleroma, like aroma. You know, Pleroma. So Pleroma can mean. I don't know if you're familiar with this. By chance, I found this once, but anyway. So Pleroma you can understand Pleroma as this feeling of total bliss at the end of everything, so to speak. This is the total, you know, this is this white bliss at the center of every culture, at this core of every religion. You know what I'm saying? This how to say nirvana or whatever you would call it. You know, this paradise, whatever. This white thing at the end. You know what everything should gravitate towards that. You know, like so this is exactly the point of communism and why people believe in this idea that everything will be perfect the next day. You know, immediately. It's the Pleroma. Nothing else. This is the idea. It's a big opium shot. You know what I'm saying? So this is the thing. And now this goes back to Mühlmann. With the Pleroma, you have positive stress. The Pleroma is a total relaxation. You see what I'm saying? This is the total differencelessness. There is no difference anymore between you and the universe. There are no resistances. There is no stress. There is no collectives clashing against each other or something like this. You see what I'm saying? How this relates? How the Pleroma relates to Mühlmann's stress on the other hand, right? And
solving the problem of culture by eliminating culture somehow, which
yeah, exactly.
Kind of reminds me of like the period of like Brassier's sort of transcendental nihilism. It's like, well, if you've transcended to a nirvana of completely obliterating subjectivity, then I would assume you would essentially come to a place of not being able to experience this sort of nirvana at the end of the death drive, you know, like, which is,
right.
I mean, like that, to me, that just makes sense.
Yeah. There's pure nothingness in the end, so to speak, but a positive one, right? And this is also the reason why you've been talking about this, you know, the fallacy of fascism, this idiotic idea that the people could keep it up, right? It's such a rigid type of society which only works with power, which only works as a transition or something like this. Because afterwards, as you say, you have immediately entropy again, and things will change. I totally agree with this. But this is the reason why all the dictators present themselves, you know, apotheotically, like they turn themselves into gods, right? They present themselves as the pharaoh, the one that was sent from God, so to speak, right? This is the reason. So they are embodying this total order. They are embodying the total Pleroma. You know, the dictators, they are simulating that, so to speak. And this is also the reason why it only stays, why they can only keep up their dictatorships for a certain time, because number one, they die. Then this symbol for the embodiment of the Pleroma falls apart, right? And the people, you know, just disappear, because they didn't produce real values in the society. They used, you know, the carrot and stick, so to speak. They used the carrot of the Pleroma for some, which were bribed, and they use the stick with the violence to suppress the others. You know, this is how these societies work. You wouldn't even call them societies. These
a perpetual war with their own people.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So, okay, just a side note. I was thinking about communism today for a short moment, but I was just wondering, just right now, I just had the idea if one could apply this really to what we had in the Soviet Union or not. You know, I know. So, is it really necessary also for communism to have violence? Will it necessarily be a dictatorship or not? Right. I mean, it depends if you can convince the people of the values, so to speak. This is the whole question. Anyway, so let me please just finish quickly the connection from Mimon to. Can I, or is it?
Please.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So wait a second. Now I have to think with the Pleroma. Yeah, exactly. So the point is now this. What Mühlmann says is that once this culture is established, it starts repeating, you know, its system, and then he calls this the cognitive, the cultural cognitive field of vision. So, in other words, the culture sees only one thing, but it doesn't see anything else because it is falling through the grid. You know, it's falling through the grid for selection of what it sees and what it considers as valuable or what it doesn't consider as valuable. So, for example, I mean, valuable in the sense of reaction, worthy a reaction. Okay, let's say like this. It's worthy a reaction. So the point is what we can see today. We put a lot of money in preventing the Earth to be hit by a comet, you know, by a meteorite or something like this. I mean, they would. I mean, they do. They put a lot of money in it, and they would put a lot of money. This is something an existential crisis or existential stress, which is within our field of vision, within the cultural field of vision, within the cultural cognitive system, right? But the destruction through climate change is obviously not part of, is not within our cognitive field of vision. All right, so it's simply not a part of it. We don't see that. We want to prevent loss of profit and things like this. We want, yeah, but we don't see this. We don't see. I mean, some see. Okay, of course, not everybody, but institutionally, right? And in the core of the values, you cannot. The climate destruction is not implemented in the cognitive vision field. We did not go through this stress to have adapted it or adopted it, you know, as values in our system. Yeah, it's very easy. I mean, it's very clear. It's you know, super clear, so to speak. There's no, I mean, there's no doubt about it. So we know that it exists, but we don't care. So, and this is the best. This is the best proof that that we have this cultural cognitive system, right? Today I've read an article which says that we are right now at climate denying, no, climate, what was it, accepting peak or something, peak climate denial or something like that. So we are saying we are just on the peak, and from now on everybody will become more and more aware that something is changing, so to speak. So it will become, so just by the way. So but it takes a while till it gets, I mean, okay, it doesn't mean that we will change institutionally anything, right? It just means that people will become more and more aware of that, right? But it doesn't mean that it will change anything institutionally. Okay, so now to finish quickly what I, you know, this long introduction, so to speak. The idea is now this: you cannot change the culture. Why? Because the culture will always react to every attack with stress reactions. You see, this is the reason why you cannot change the culture. So when you go to the people and say you have to change, you have to abandon capitalism and so on, what is happening? The people don't think rationally about it, where stress reactions are coming, where deep stress reactions. You see, this is the deep, the engraved, how to say, you know, the how to say this, yeah, engraved into their minds, into their hormonal system.
An imprint. An imprint.
Yeah,
Imprint.
exactly. Thanks. So an imprint. So it's imprinted in their, not only in their brain, but in their hormonal system, so to speak. And then you have stress reactions against it. In other words, this is the reason why you will never, ever be able as a communist to convince a capitalist or to change something in capitalism from the side. Why? Because you are attacking the people and they don't even know that they are responding in a attack reaction, so to speak, right? So they just say, I don't think so, I don't believe it, but in reality, it's a stress defense mechanism, so to speak, right? And so what I'm saying, in other words, is that there's no way to, either by ratio nor by any other, you know, Even if tomorrow climate change will start, people will not stop being capitalists, you know what I'm saying, the modern world, so to speak. They will not change anything about it because at first, always the stress reaction must come. You know, at first they will always push away what's putting them at risk, you know, putting them in danger, so to speak. They will always push it away. And you have to somehow push through this to get to the deeper level, but you will not get there, so to speak, because they will push you away. So, and therefore, what you can do, this is one of the ideas, so to speak, of my work, is not use a stick or something like this, but use the carrot of producing a new Pleroma. And by that, tricking the cultural cognition field by showing it, hey, look, there is something even better than you have already now. You see, so that it, so to speak, glides into the new equilibrium. You cannot push it. You can only allow it to see that there is something better and slowly go in this other direction. Okay, so this is the I guess I hope I made this somehow clear now. So, and this is the reason why I was thinking about this post. How can we find out what is coming after modernity, right? And offering it to the narcissistic being, modernity, offering it, look at this, you can see this with your cognitive vision field. It looks good, doesn't it? You know, so we are not pushing modernity, we are offering the modernity a new equilibrium. You know, like you're opening a plug, so to say, and then it's flooding into this new, into this new stage. So this was one of the reasons, or you know, one of the ideas in the background of the work. So in other words, we need to, but the point is, you need to be sure. You need to know what's coming after modernity, so to speak. It has to be convincing. It cannot just be fiction. It just cannot be just speculation. You know, there must be. It must link up to some core values of modernity, so to speak. Yeah, you see my point. So this is the whole idea. And that's the reason why I was dealing with evolutionary theory and evolution of civilization, to find out if there's a way to know what's coming after modernity, to throw this new Pleroma, you know, into the world, so to speak. Yeah. Okay, so this is my introduction. 47 minutes, so to speak. So how this how this plays into your conversations. I think in many ways, but I think I'll stop now for a moment. I can talk more. So.
Yeah, it answers the question I tried to bring up last time about like how do you get there from here? And I see it, you know, I like this approach because it's not ignoring. I hate to use lessons of the past because they're always whatever you kind of read into your history, but just kind of the idea that you have to project a vision. You really have to project a vision, but the vision is not something you gather from the ether. It's something that you look from human trends that you've seen played out in history over and over again and extrapolating forward from there. So that's very helpful for me because it kind of answered my question. We can kind of springboard from there.
I think for me, I can be open to believe in this pleroma or this potential bliss that would come from aligning myself to this new kind of principle of a post-money or post-capitalist, because I'm moving that direction anyway and always have. I'm open to believe that, and I do believe that, but I'm also surrounded by people who are not open to believing that. And I want to acknowledge that if you can get them to be open to doubt the current system, then there will be perhaps a lot of grief around the loss of that system that they may not like it, but they know it. And lots of people are disenfranchised and dislike the system. Most people are at the bottom, not at the top. So there's widespread malaise. But I think it's like, how do we, when people are open to doubt, which is great, how do we redirect their attention to something that could give them a direction? Because if they're just going to be grief-stricken, that's going to lower their IQ and prevent them from healing any of these wounds. And they will be in that post-traumatic stress frenzy. And I think that's a challenge for all of us, because we're all in this together. You know, it's not like it's obvious what the inside and the outside of these culture clashes are. I mean, look at Mexico and the United States and the absurdity of building a wall between these two countries, you know, to satisfy the paranoia and really a small percentage of the population. But I think we're mobilizing all these forces in such an exaggerated way for something that isn't going to work. Just as I heard the mayor of Manhattan, mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, as you mentioned, if 6 degrees, if there's a rise in temperature of 6 degrees, Manhattan will be underwater. He's seriously making plans for building a wall around lower Manhattan, as if a wall is going to keep out the Atlantic Ocean. Well, in a way, I'm sort of like, well, I'm glad he's making a plan, but I mean, this is as dumb as it gets.
Yeah.
And this guy wants to run for the United States. He wants to run for the president of the United States, and you might, you know, get some. Anyway, I'm just presenting this as, okay, well, at least the guy's taking seriously climate change, but building a wall is not an adequate response to that acknowledgement that things are changing very quickly. So,
well,
any ideas?
It is a stress response.
I actually wanted to sort of piggyback off of that, is that a lot of this kind of, you know, how you say we're under this amount of stress. And the problem that I'm seeing with people is that a lot of this sort of, these politics they're really politics of fear, but you can't have an emancipatory politics if the precondition of emancipation is fear, because emancipation is freedom from fear. And this is the problem that I see with these kind of like left doomsday kind of mongers. And when I see people like Beto O'Rourke and, you know, AOC, let's just get this out there, I'm really not a fan of her. I think she has all the wrong reductive solutions to these very serious problems. And, you know, it's like you said with the wall, it's like this is an oversimplification. First off, because most immigration that is actually sort of, if you were talking about resources, it's actually China with the one-child policy, so you can send kids to the United States, you know, the sort of medical thing. So it's like Mexico has very little bearing in that. And in the process of satisfying a contingency of idiots who wanted to build the fucking wall, thinking that that's a good idea, it's a stupid idea, they made a deal that actually allowed, you know, millions of more people into this country. I mean, if we look at actual immigration numbers into America, it's up since Obama, legally and illegally, you know? So at the end of the day, if you're satisfying this sort of, this sort of mythology of, you know, a structure being able to solve these very complex problems, I'm not making an ethical claim for the problem or not the problem. I'm personally very pro-border because I believe in a welfare state, and you can't have welfare if you don't have a state. That's just the way, you know, the world works. You know, we have, you know, we live in a world of nation states. That's just a material reality. Like we can't ignore that. It doesn't mean you build a wall to deal with that. It doesn't mean you blame somebody else's culture. It just means you don't have to be a bigot, basically, in order to make this point obviously clear. You know, and I think this is the problem with a lot of this rhetoric. And so some of this rhetoric, if we want to talk about this sort of change, if we look at the kind of impotency of art, and there's actually there's this thing where, you know, all art kind of made within the past 3 years was just basically like, screw Orange Man bad. So they go through this like long artist press release, and then you have these people who are basically art agents, you know, telling these wealthy collectors how to shell out their money so that they get tax write-offs, and they sort of prop this stuff up. So there's actually not a real relation between the buyer and the object. You know, it's all basically used for these sort of nefarious purposes. And I think it's kind of interesting. And while this is going on, you have people engaging in visual culture on the right, literally red pilling millions of kids who are 18 years old, whatever you want to say, and converting them through memes and YouTube. So like we have to sort of see, like, what are the tactics that work? And obviously, if we're looking at things that are like intermediary that sort of satisfy this bourgeoisie corporatism, that I think is a really, really big problem. I think it's a big problem. Like I said, when I talk about late capitalism, you know, people say, oh, you must be this or that. I'm not left or right. I don't like either. Both of them are bad solutions. So I'm just wondering, how do we take the fear out of this, out of emancipatory politics? Like, how do we gain a freedom of fear?
I think a basic income would be a good idea.
I agree. That's why I'm all for it.
Psychologically, it would just
amazing.
It would stabilize enormous portions of our population, which are now in this paranoid downward.
Completely.
And I think we should move towards that. And I think some people are. Yeah. And not just in the U.S., but around the world. I think in Norway they've even initiated it. Yeah. And they've gotten some responses to what's it like for the subjectivities of those who are receiving this.
Well, it's interesting because
and they're very happy.
Yeah,
they're
Alaska's a red state. It's a Republican state, and they have a universal basic income, and they're very happy, and employment hasn't dropped at all.
Exactly.
You know, like, this is not a left or a right issue. This is a basic human issue. And I think this is something we can see that's gaining a lot of traction. That's why I'm all for it. Right. 100%.
Right. Oh, Douglas, you're here. Okay. Chime in whenever you want, Doug. Glad to see you.
I'll be quiet.
And I'm sure there are other policies that we could come up with, and I think that are in this paper that you mentioned, and about how we can create a compelling future for ourselves, and how we need to use our imaginations to do that. Or we can use our imaginations to create these dystopian fantasies and respond to them now as if they've already happened. And so we can flood our systems with analgesias that make us feel fabulous, or with toxic, too much adrenaline will be pumping for our system. And so we'll be acting in a state of panic, even though there's nothing in our immediate environment to generate that kind of response. So our minds are extremely powerful. And I think this is the new technology, I think. It's not going to outer space. It's about the inner space. And of course, this is my interest, is in the intersubjective and the new kind of subjectivities, and how do you triangulate from the margins. And the big movement that I was engaged in was the gay movement. And the state, the medical industry, the church, they were all unified against gay people. And I was brought up in that world. And then when AIDS came along, it was predicted that the beginning of the gay movement would quickly evaporate, and people would run back into the closet. And I remember that day when I saw that on the New York Times, that prediction that the gay movement was over, I said, fuck these people. And I felt this pulsing in my solar plexus. It was very unpleasant, but I got together with all my friends, and they got together with their friends, and we all came together in droves. And we started to make alliances, and we made and I think that's something that I can't remember the name of the theorist that we read recently, but he was looking back at the gay movement as a model, he thought, for something that needs to happen now. And I think that would be a generative, many layers of generativity were happening back then. And of course, that was before, that was like in the 80s and the 90s. And I think things have changed dramatically since then for gay people. And LGBTQ is now, everybody knows what that is. And I think there's a whole lot of healing that has happened, and new identities have started to emerge. I remember how there was a shift in my identity when the Supreme Court struck down the sodomy laws and apologized to gay people and said that the law should not be used by any group to discriminate against another group because they are not liked. And I remember that has a physiological response. I literally felt like a ton was lifted off of my shoulders. So I believe these are the kind of, and we don't even know that we're carrying that baggage around. And that's why I think it's so, it's our somatic intelligence is so important, that people pay very exquisite attention to this, to the somatic. And I think it's getting harder and harder to do with this technology, where people are glued to their flat screens, and those that affective side of their natures are being suppressed by this, you know, this attractor. But I think it doesn't have to be that way. I think we can use this technology, as we're doing right now, to create relationships and to use our imaginations and to tap into our intelligence and our innate creativity as we're at this new edge. And I feel like we're highly motivated to do that as the news gets worse and worse and worse. I mean, I just saw the New York Times reporting the depth of the oceans, you know, and every day I think that it's starting to, people are starting to grieve. I know I was grief-stricken when I heard that a fifth of the coral reef has died in the last 3 years. It was reported in the New York Times, a very conservative paper. But I remember that feeling of grief, and I just allowed it. And it lasted for a day or two. And then I felt stronger because I was really, we got this really bad news. A few years ago, they were speculating that the coral reef was going to be fine. Now there's been a different message that I think people are getting. And once you grieve for it, I think you can tap into enormous power. And I believe has been my experience working in the trenches in the gay rights movement. So I'm just sharing that with you guys. Hopefully we can find some connections here so that we can move forward and redirect our own attention when we get into those funky states, and also help to create conditions where we can help redirect other people's attention. As you say, to that pleroma that you were mentioning earlier, Davor.
Yeah, you know what? This is not. I'm just thinking. Maybe this is very interesting. I never thought of it this way. Indeed, maybe this is the problem. Everybody knows that modernity is over, but they don't want to accept it.
Right.
Nobody wants to enter grief. This is the point. You know.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And the grief is going to be awful, but once you let go and you've acknowledged it, you say farewell to that beloved friend that's gone, and you make new friends. You know, it just keeps on, you know, you can heal those ones and you can move on, and you can have a creative life, and you can still remember that person or that institution or that work of art or that style of performance, which you no longer identify with, you know, or your adolescence or your youth or your adulthood, you know, as you get older, you start letting go of those. So anyway, I think we have tremendous untapped potentials.
And we have tremendous vested interests, though, behind some of the people who want to maintain the old systems, though, too. So I'm thinking maybe, you know, sometimes, well, Davor started off the talk with it. It's almost like you do need a little bit of a crisis for some, just to be shocked. I mean, some of us are, you know, looking at the alternatives already, but others are, you know, you're going to need that shock. You're going to need that stress event, really, and build a new culture from it. I mean, that's the pessimistic way of looking at it, I guess, but that's what I'm drawn to. It's like, and I really appreciated also the comment about revolution. That's what I did my major on decades ago, the American and French revolutions. It just kind of, it doesn't work because it just sweeps the most ruthless people into the places of power that you just took the last set out from. So it doesn't really get you anywhere. But but on the other, saying that, you do kind of need a crisis, or it would seem that way. Or how do we, you know, avoid that?
Yeah, exactly. So this was the idea, how to get to the new stage without the catastrophe triggering, or, you know, the transition of the, I mean, the same is happening. The same happened with the beginning of capitalism. I'm not sure if you know the story. It has to do with the plague, with the Black Plague in 1350, around 1350. So what happened is before that you had the feudal or late feudal economic distribution. You know, you have the I don't know how you say in English, like the the feudal lord and the how do you say serfs?
Yeah. Manorialism, but yeah, the economic system where the lords, they're owning the land, but the peasants are working it and building it. Yeah.
Okay, so you studied that, you know better than you can.
Oh no.
No, you didn't. Okay, anyway. So the point is that anyway, so the point is that at this moment you still had, but what does it mean? It means that everybody was still bound to his farm, you know, and to his land. So, and now the plague came. The plague, you know, killed like 30% or something like this. That means at some places everybody survived, at others nobody survived. So that means you had a huge disbalance between the people of the land and the people who can work with the land, you know, who can grow crops and so on.
Totally shifted the labor relations.
Exactly, and this shifted then, and then as a reaction to that, they invented the labor laws in England first.
Right.
And this is how capitalism was institutionalized. It was there before because of the manufacturers and the banks and so on. You know, in principle, so to speak, it was already growing, but the shift to the new system happened exactly through the plague, and it's again a stress. It's a stress event.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying that everything is. You understand what I'm saying? So it's complicated.
Right.
There are more factors, but this is one strong factor that caused this new type of institution and new types of values to appear to survive the plague, basically.
The catalyst, really.
Yeah, the catalyst, yeah, and also the plague itself was the catalyst, but at the same time the plague stays as a constant reactualizer, so to speak. How should I say this?
Yeah, bring around the rosy.
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. I know the AIDS epidemic was a devastating tragedy, and I also know if we had not had the AIDS epidemic, sodomy laws would not have been struck down, and there wouldn't be gay marriage, same-sex marriage, because those were direct responses to that epidemic. Because a lot of people said, okay, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die fighting for what I really believe, rather than just trying to get by in a system that I know is corrupt. So I think that when the rug is pulled out from people, there's sure some people will not recover, but some people will be much more creative and resilient and resourceful than they ever would have been if they had not been pushed up against it. And I do believe there is I think everybody is aware that the system isn't working. The systems that we have been taught to believe in and trust are not trustworthy. And I think it can end up in a downward spiral. People get very nihilistic and just say, oh, fuck it, I'm just going to get a job on Wall Street and make a lot of money. Who gives a shit? But you need to let those people know that that's bullshit, you know, that there's a passive and active forms of nihilism. Some people are just turning into couch potatoes and watching a lot of TV or Netflix. But I think that if we can redirect our attention, redirect their attention, and have that sense of openness to believe. And I think just in this conversation, I can feel a kind of generativity, a kind of spark. And we can let that start to radiate outwards in our discourse events, and that may have that can become a catalyst, and we can find a new kind of stability rather than just retreating into, you know, creating walls of despair around ourselves or getting into our little solipsistic bubbles. There's a kind of risk factor, you know, going out and making yourself available to others, and it feels kind of weird sometimes in these public forums. But we're trying to create, I think, a new kind of container, a safe enough container, so we can do some kind of experimenting.
Would it take New York going underwater to?
That's
going to make my commute really hard. Yeah, I live on 2nd Avenue, and the predictions are not good. And you know, I flattered myself at one time, says, "Oh well, I'll be dead and gone before that happens." Maybe not. I mean, at the rate of you know, I might see it in my lifetime, which is a horrifying thought. I did see a major flood, the big Hurricane Sandy, which was about 5 or 6 years, which is devastating. You remember that, TJ? You were here.
And I'm inland, and it just knocked out power all across the state. Yeah, it was what sort of, I mean, short of catastrophe, what are the kinds of things that you think would really start to generate a critical mass towards thinking, you know, thinking that the end of the system is not optional, it's really coming? What I mean, because obviously a 20% of the coral reef didn't quite do it.
Yeah.
Well, and the flood in Sandy, Hurricane Sandy, and then that big catastrophe in Houston. I have family members who were in that big hurricane Houston. And then there's fires and flash floods all over the place and all over the world. We're seeing these things. I think that, well, I think there's something you said here in your, in this essay. You were talking about the level of higher integration. I think you're drawing a Piaget here. The level of higher integration brings forth a temporality that integrates all previous temporalities. It can be called scenario temporality or generative time regime. And I'm also reminded of Gebser, Jean Gebser, who some of us have studied intensely. And he talks about the integral or the aperspectival, which he believes comes after the mental structure has been well established and has become a deficient form of rationality. And I think that we're seeing, I think, widespread breakdowns in faith in the rational. I think you're seeing very paranoid, hunkered down, these neo-rationalists, I think you call them, Barrett, who are getting more and more deficient and trying to quantify everything, and assuming there's going to be an algorithm for just about everything. And I think that there's some thinkers that I think are much more appreciating that we can't. There's the biotic systems and abiotic systems have to be harmonized somehow, so that we can't just sit around passively and say, oh, well, computers are going to take care of us. Don't worry about it. Because I don't think that's a very good belief to have right now. So we can't offload onto abiotic systems our sense of what's right and wrong, because they're not going to solve any of this for us. So anyway, I'm just sharing that. Not because I want to become rally around a pseudo kind of humanism, but I think, or human exceptionalism, which I'm not a part of that. But I think we do need to find some sort of post-human or transhuman that finds a balance, because I think otherwise there's a tendency to tip into a kind of passive, sort of a passive informationalism, if you will. So anyway, I'm just sharing that. I hope that someone has a response to that, because I'm really curious about that and wondering about it myself.
If TJ, do you have something to say? Well, because I have a lot to say, so I'm just.
Oh no, yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, just yeah, it's a very, very complicated question. I mean, complicated. You're right to point in this moment to this thing, to this part of the essay. But I'm thinking how to explain this. So the point is this: we would need a catastrophe that, of course, affects everybody on the whole planet globally, right? So this is and we have this catastrophe which is called climate change, but it doesn't affect us right now. So if a comet, would fly towards the Earth, then of course the people would unite immediately, hopefully, probably, right? Because we will all die. It's very easy. So and it doesn't even have to be, America leading the way. Whoever is going to lead the way, it doesn't matter. It will be like a global thing or something like this. For a moment, everybody will be united, and then maybe it will fall apart again. You know what I'm saying? If it's a problem that you can only solve by putting all the possible people into one big operational chain to align them to produce the rocket that will save us from the comet or something like this. So the problem with climate change is that it is exactly such a catastrophe, but it's an invisible one, right? So it's generations, and it will not even attach. How should I say? Yeah, it doesn't affect us today. So it's very simple. I find it unbelievable how people, when I have a couple of friends who recently became parents, and they are so proud of their new cars and their SUVs, so they are driving around their babies in these SUVs, and I'm always wondering, how stupid are you? I mean, what's going on with you? I mean, I'm sorry if I insult somebody of you with an SUV, but the point is, this happiness that you have with your baby is kind of contradicting the happiness when you sit in an SUV, because you're destroying the future of your baby and of your grandchildren immediately, directly. I mean, you're directly, I'm always saying, look, if every time you press the pedal, you are shitting directly into the throat of your baby. This is the point, because it's true. This is what's happening. You are destroying the future of these people. So, and you are basically a mass murderer. So it's very easy. And the point is, nobody needs SUVs. It's a marketing trick, So this is what makes me okay. So obviously today we are ranting a little bit, so I'm going to rant a little bit too. I remember in the 2000s when the first SUVs came, it was like a gimmick or some sort of joke or something like this, especially in Europe, because we don't have these big cars. In America it's normal to have big cars, but to us it was just a grotesque, overblown. It was confusing, and nobody needs it, right? But today you also see more and more people, not more and more, like 50% or something like this. Why? Because it's marketing. It's good to drive an SUV for whatever reason it is. I mean, I know it's more comfortable, but it's totally counterproductive if we talk at the same time about climate. So I know that the car itself is not so much a problem, because it's nothing compared to the rest of what we are doing. But it's a symbol. It's a symbol that we simply don't care. Right, so this is the anyway. So what did I want to say with this? Yeah, exactly. So the people don't get that. They cannot think this second order future. They are not related to that. Right? They are not related to this abstraction of the future itself. That future will have a future, right? That there will be humans which even have a future. So now the important thing is this: today's current linear time frame that we know. I mean, that we are used to thinking, right? This evolutionary one monolithic block of growth, of technological progress, this cone, this cone of time, so to speak, from the Big Bang till today. So this is a new thing, and this is a new concept, and it's also a very strong abstraction, so to speak. So it's something that you have to learn, and it's something that developed during modernity, in the beginning of modernity, for different reasons. In the essay, I have summarized some, but there are more reasons why exactly in modernity this new type of time appeared, right? So, but what's important about it is that it's also not universal. It's one way to map reality, so to speak, and it appeared at a certain time, and it's of a certain level of abstraction. I mean, I'm how to say, I'm talking to you, how to say this, running into open doors, because Gibson, so you know what I'm talking about. So it's here, yeah. So here's also this. No, wait a second, I'm confusing this now. He's talking about time, right? Not only about consciousness, about this time, about the magical time, and yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, so what I'm saying, yeah. So he was actually exactly like this spring 10 years ago when I started to work on this. Gebser was one of the first books that I read that opened this whole, this whole research project, so to speak. One of the books. Anyway, so yeah. So what I'm saying is this: we have these different structures of time, and what I showed in this work is that they are related, that they don't appear just by chance. It's not an invention. It's not just a symbolic system or something like this. It's not just an aesthetic, but they come in certain, there are some certain generative conditions, so to speak. There are conditions that produce these types of times, which we can see very easily if you look back in time. Then we see that certain time gestalt, gestalt, the time figures, figures of gestalt of time, certain types of time or certain figures of time appear independently from each other in different cultures. Like, for example, the Maya have a similar time regime or time gestalt as the Egyptians and as the Mesopotamians, for example, right? So you can see that the time concepts are not arbitrary or not, you know, not contingent or something like this. So they appear with a certain stage of technology or with a certain stage of, anyway. So to make it short, to shorten what I'm saying, if it's true that we are right now again on a certain new stage of technology as before, then we can know that there will be a new type of time. So that a new type of time will appear. So this is the whole idea behind this work. And what I've shown in my work is that we can see it this way. So we can see that there are certain levels of technological development, or let's say cultural, the cultural capacities and the civilizational capacities, which are building up on each other with a certain logic, with a certain principle, following a certain principle. And when we apply this criteria, then we see that today we are again at the beginning of such a new stage, and that means that in the long run or short run, a new temporality will appear again. It must appear. It will appear based on linearity, right? So, and this new time must, so to speak, okay, it's a little bit complicated to explain why, but must contain the second order futures. It is this, just as the people in the Middle Ages, after, for example, after the plague, got used to think in abstract time in the future. Like, for example, if you're a worker, you have to get used that whatever you do is not yours. You work with your hands, but it's not yours. You give it to the capitalist. It's his, and you have to wait until the end of the month till you get a symbol for your work, right? Money. You know what I'm saying. So this is, so to speak, the training for long-term temporality thinking, abstract into the future thinking, right? And at the same time, of course, the capitalist also is projecting his profit into the future, so to speak. So his expectations for profit. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that that just as in the beginning of modernity, a new temporality, a new abstraction of time was implemented, we are right now again at the beginning of the implementation of a new time into our minds. Okay, it will be again more abstract and again different, and it will be based on this linear time frame, so to speak. If we transition to this new stage, this is the point. Or in other words, we can also say the transition to this new stage is the new time. And now is the question. Now one question could be, for example, if we somehow try to inject this new time and inject this new cognition that comes with this time, that maybe then you can accelerate or catalyze the system transition. This would be one question, because otherwise we would have to wait for the system transition to change our minds and not the other way around, so to speak. So this is the. I mean, this is the long answer to your question. I don't know if this was somewhat clear.
That's helpful. Because again, the question is, do we have the luxury of waiting this time, or do we actually really need to? Right.
Exactly. So this is exactly the point. This is the other catastrophe is, or how should I say, the other shifts in existential shifts, positive or negative or stressful in the past, always only affected one culture. One culture dies, no problem. There are still billions of people on the planet, but this time it's the whole. Right. This is the problem. So this time it's the whole. It's the big either or, right? Either you survive or you don't. So this is everybody, not just the and this is the problem. So there's no second chance in that sense.
You mentioned in your opening remarks that the stress that occurs to that soldier who goes out and he fights and he wins, and in that reflective space promote certain values that was learned in battle, even though the battle is over. And then you also said there were losers, and they have a different story.
Very different.
And when they reflect upon their experience, something else has happened to them.
Yes,
perhaps they have been absorbed into another system against their will, but they lost. And I think this is something that's happening now, that many people are losing. They're not winners, reflecting upon the good fight that they had and won. They fought, and they fought really hard, and they lost everything. But they're not being absorbed the way that peoples have been absorbed in a larger system, because as this planetarization happens, everybody is in it already. You know? And that's why they have to go to outer space to take this colonizing theme forward. They have to leave this planet, because everybody is. So I think this whole sense of the inside and the outside, we're entering into this sort of like a Mobius strip. You know, that twist in the Mobius strip where you don't know, where the inside and the outside become very confusing or obscure or paradoxical. So I think those topological figures interest me a lot, because I think they sort of express this kind of paradox that many people feel they're in, where they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. This looks really interesting, but that also looks very interesting. So I think these dilemmas and these paradoxes are not just for the losers or the winners. I think losers and winners are feeling this. Anyway, I'm wondering, that's a little speculative. I hope that doesn't sound too much like a rant, but I'm working on this.
No, I think the importance of the frontiers, the importance of creating a frontier, even if you don't, you know, see one physically in front of you, is almost important to.
That's why I say I think the new frontier is the interiors. I think
we've never been good at that.
We've never been good at it. Some people have been extremely good at it. And I think a lot of artists and poets are naturally tend in that direction and finding some different way of working with the inner and the outer. But I think the inner and the outer is different from the interior and the exterior. And I know you talked about the 4 different kinds of the outside. And in one of your preliminary talks that I listened to, I was a little confused about that. But I think it's a very, I know you said the outside is where a lot of the new structures will emerge in this sort of confrontation with an outside. But I'm wondering how we're going to do that now. I think what's happening is 2 different kinds of, there's globalization and then there's planetarization. And I think these are 2 different ways of relating to each other and to you know, and redefining our relationship with nature. So that's why I get I think the first order world is a very globalizing, corporate driven capitalist system. But I think there's another potential that many of us have been, you know, endorsing for a long time, and an ecology movement that's very strong in a lot of people's thinking. So where, you know, the magical and the mythical are welcome. You don't have to, and I think the rational, the healthy rational, I think Gebser would say, is a harmonization of the magical and the mythical. But he would say the deficient rational is opposed to all forms of the mythical and the magical, recognizing there are deficient forms of magic and mythical, but that these can coexist in a person and in healthy forms. And I believe that way, that's great, because then we don't need to add on anything new. We've got it all already. We've gone through archaic, magical, mythical structures. We're in the rational now. And I believe it's just a matter, if we could start harmonizing this rather than trying to put a price tag on everything, we could move into the aperspectival or the integral, or what you're calling the technological civilization, or the emergent, or, you know, whatever you want to call it. I don't really care. But there's got to be something better than this, that's for sure. Anyway.
Yeah, difficult. It's true, yeah. It's true. There are so many factors that you have to take into account. Yeah, I mean, the point is, who can shift? You know, can you educate the kids, babies, or, you know, like young children that are in kindergarten right now, or something like this, or school, grown-ups who have a job and who have responsibilities? It's very difficult. Yeah, it's hard to really think about how to implement this holistic thinking, or whatever you wanna. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot more to say, but I'm just saying this this right now quickly. So because just changing the consciousness is a difficult thing to. I mean, by arguments or something like this. This is very, very difficult, and convincing people. I mean, classically, you either use to re-educate a person. What can you do? You know, you can either hope for their capacities for reason and they change by themselves, or you use violence, or you use money or something like this. You know, so what else could you do? So so in other words, probably the only way is like a mix of everything. You see what I'm saying? So you need the concepts to be in the public sphere, you know, to float around, to people know what's happening, and probably also need some sort of new incentive or something like this. I'm just saying, you know, so it's not so easy with this magical thinking. So I was always thinking when I was young that even the worst dictator or something just needs to read the right book and he will change into a good person. You know what I'm saying? So this was this European idealism that we, stupid as we are here in Europe, believe in. You know, that you just have to enlighten somebody. You know, with Kant, you just tell him, then you show him the real reality, and then he will change into a good person. I don't believe this anymore today. So it's a very difficult problem.
I think the challenge is the vision is often not necessarily about me personally. To have a vision is about others, and others that I will never know. I'll be dead and gone, but I know that I will have done my best for those future others, and that is a great comfort to me, and it creates enormous motivation, and in a way that making money does not. Not that making money is bad. It's a value I have, and all of us probably share, that we need money, but it's not anything to do with a vision. And I think that's the vision is a very imaginative space to enter into, and it can be extremely satisfying. And you know, you have to know what you want. That doesn't mean you're going to get it, but you have to know what it is you want. And you may want it not because someone already has it, or it's been here for decades and you just go out and shop for it and you can put it on and wear it, or get a new SUV or whatever, or a new kind of status symbol. Sometimes people want things that no one's ever had before. And I think we've abolished slavery, and we've done basically because there's people who just wanted to do that. They wanted it really, really badly, and they were willing to make great personal sacrifices for that to happen. And I see that in all kinds of movements around the world, where people just pooled their resources because they wanted something, and they just wanted it, and they did something about it. But I think that's where it's a real challenge, how you can integrate these visionary and dreamy magical aspects of our nature with the hardcore realist who has to implement a plan, because you have to have both. And then there's that critical evaluative part of ourselves that can step back and reflect upon it all. But I think we can't do it. I think if we integrate those functions of the critic and the dreamer and the visionary and the realist who implements a plan, I believe those higher potentials that you were talking about in this paper can be those potentials can be widely distributed, because I don't think those are spectacularly features of an incredibly enlightened person. I think it's available to everybody, pretty much, at this mental structure, that they have. Especially, they have those functions already installed. They just need to use them better than they ever have before.
Right. Especially if we treat it as a multi-stage process, which is kind of where I'm thinking. You get the ideas out there first, and you articulate them well, like Davor, you were saying. You put the vision out there, and you put the vision out there on the basis of the experiences that the culture is going through, and the imagination, well, the danger, and then you kind of you craft that, and you get that into enough people's heads. And that's a long, now again, you wonder if you have the luxury to do that, but I would think, you know, that would be the foundation of it. And then as the crises start to come in and they can no longer be ignored, then people start to, oh, well, this is what we talked about, you know, last year or whatever, and then build the next stage into it. I totally agree. I don't think you just kind of jump, but if you don't start putting the bee, you know, in everybody's bonnet first, so to speak, you know.
Well, one of the things I think is an interesting point is just thinking about SUVs is like as we're kind of faced with this actual sort of decline of, you know, kind of extended family and sort of the familial structure due to kind of economic precarity because of I find it kind of ironic that you can convince people to buy SUVs now when we need them less now, if we were to need them at all, than we would in the past. It's like, if you can convince people to buy an SUV without a family, you can convince people to do anything. You know, so it's
station wagons.
yeah. So I kind of think it's like, that's kind of why I do actually have hope for ideas, you know. And I think, I mean, you can convince people to eat at Olive Garden, you know, you know, I mean, like, so I just think it's about the right kind of ideas, you know. And I think that what John and what I think everybody kind of here, what we can all agree on is it's not about this sort of ultra functionalist vision of humans, that we ourselves are just, you know, mere tools, and that there can be no thriving or no room for anything, you know, mythical or even to entertain any of these notions. It's like, you know, I think it's interesting that it's like you have people who have died in bloody wars throughout history, you know, for something that we can't verify. Religion, you know, we can't verify whether my God is the correct God or your God is the right God. But how many people have been willing to die for, you know, pragmatism and mathematics? It's like, okay, 2 + 2 = 4. You think 2 + 2 = 5? Okay, shoot me. You know, how many people in history have been willing to die for mathematical equations? I mean, I'm not talking about mathematicians. I'm talking about everyday kind of people. So I think it's interesting that we can't just, you know, the metaphysical dilemma that people are trying to overcome, it's not so easily overcome. It's not, and nor should we overcome it, I don't think, because I just don't see that as a possibility, and B, I see it as a necessary driving factor in order to implement some sort of material change. They have to go together. You can't have one or the other. You can't reduce them to that thing. You need a healthy amount of both. And it's, how do we find that correct balance to allow these two things to sort of like harmoniously work together? And so I think this is kind of today, you know, within these kind of circles, what we're sort of faced with. You have this sort of ultra essentialists versus the ultra constructivists. You have sort of like, you know, the Platonists versus the Aristotelians, you know, and it's this like bloody galactic war that they think is being fought between these two sects of people, you know, and I don't see it that way, you know, personally. So
getting rid of dichotomies would be a great thing too.
Oh,
there's plenty of them, you know, the free will versus determinism, or, you know, all these, even left right, which I totally agree with everybody else, is just like outlived its usefulness, whatever usefulness it had.
Yeah.
I think we need to get rid of the idea of the individual as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we need to start thinking in terms of movements rather than leaders. And I think, and I know you're critical of AOC, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, I think she's a certain kind of leader. It's a transitional figure, and I'm all for that, because she has the Green New Deal, and she's presenting it in a very educational kind of, as if this would work. And even in the New York Times, as skeptical as they are, and they're reading it and they're thinking about it, and there's some people say, yeah, we can do this, and it's what needs to be done. So I'm just saying, she's a transitional figure. We're all transitional figures.
Yeah.
but she's coming out of a movement, I think.
Of course.
I think we need to, and I agree. I think Congress is a waste of time, and I'm not interested in running for Congress, or or I'm not that passionate about voting for anyone who wants to run for Congress or for president, for that matter. But I can still see some value in mobilizing and re-educating ourselves in these open-ended kind of possibilities, rather than falling into the same old Democrat Republican bullshit.
Well, the problem I have,
binaries that are hardwired in our systems. How are we going to loosen this up even a little bit to be liberating?
But the problem I have with her is that when you're not necessarily, and this is my issue, is that I understand that on a certain level she's kind of like Trump or anybody else. She's an avatar. She's a manifestation. She's a figure of movement, and I think that it's important to recognize that. But we also, I think, have to look at, when you're putting these ideas out there that are, when you're talking about renewable energy, which is horrible for wildlife, there's a lot of dangers to that, and you're presenting these things as these kind of like all-inclusive, solutions to everything. And, she said something that really kind of irked me, that she said, we can argue because I've been fact-checked and I've been wrong a bunch of times, and we can argue about facts and semantics, but the question is, am I morally right? And I'm like, this is just pure constructivism masquerading as objectivism, which is why I think figure of movement, I kind of see her as this other side of the bipolarity. And so what I'm interested in is a destruction of the bipolarity. And this is kind of where I fall in line a lot with maybe a structural or orthodox Marxist take, which is I want a unipolarity of commons. And I see that this kind of thing, this back and forth thing, and then, on one hand, she'll say, they've been pitting the workers against each other of different races. And then she'll go 20 seconds later, so something, Trump would do, and immediately start getting into all this like identitarian, politically correct nonsense, and it's like, so I see that as this kind of like almost basic, bourgeois leftism that I don't think really is speaking to the margins. I don't think it's grouping the margins. I think it's a part of the thing that's actually tearing the margins apart, because now we have a whole other issue to argue about. And so, I'll just make this very clear. I'm a big Andrew Yang supporter, big time. I
don't know him very well, so I'm open.
Yeah, he was running off the UBI platform, and he's almost kind of like the thing that's bringing everybody together. And and he's human, and he's functional as well. Like he blends those two things together. And I was like sitting there just praying every night. I was like, when will there be somebody who finally can merge this thing together and stop this bipolarity? And one of the slogans is, I'm not left or right, I'm forward. And that's exactly how I feel, and his slogan is humanity first. And I'm like, well, that's a very nice way, because I find it interesting that, and I think Nina Power kind of wrote something about this, is like, one of the most human thing in humanism is such a humanist concept. It's a concept that could literally only be generated by human cognition. So I think it's like, this is sending us back to this other place. And I think it's a beautiful place. And that's like a place I want to live in, personally. So I hate to be this like evangelist for this one guy, because obviously this one guy who's not going to be elected president, like he's not the hopes to all my dreams and ambitions, but it's a start, it's the beginning of a movement. Yeah, exactly. And he's a part of a movement.
Exactly. And I think this is where we need to start bringing our attention to this, to these movements.
Exactly. Instead of avatars.
Right.
Instead of
Rather than getting involved in the personalities of some.
Yeah, the personalities, we can just disregard them.
And I think there's a generational shift as the boomers start to age, and I think there's a new group of politicians coming forward with their foibles and their weaknesses and their blind spots. We all have them, but it's what we do with them that's important, and who you're hanging out with.
Yeah.
And I also want to thank Davor, because I know it must be getting late there for you, Davor.
Oh, it's good. Yeah.
Okay, good. But I just wanted to. It's 9:45, and we'll be up to almost the second hour coming up in the next 15 minutes. So if we want to make some summary statements or move towards what happens next, I'm really open for that, because I'm fascinated once again by this essay, and I wish your book, when it comes out, it was coming out in English, but it's in German, so I'm going to have to wait for a while for that translation.
I was going to ask about that myself.
But I love this idea that we're already working on it. The last sentence in this essay, you just have to become aware that we are this second order culture, and I believe we are moving in this direction. And some of us have been there for decades, and it just hasn't been labeled or blessed. You know, you name it and you label it and you bless it. Yes, this is good. Go out and prosper. Go out and flourish. And I think if we just let ourselves know, oh yeah, this is what I'm working on. Let's acknowledge it and let's bless it and not be embarrassed by it. And go out there and be congruent in our behavior when we start having these exchanges with people who are not open to change, but who are up against it and are frightened.
Yeah, the problem is most don't even know that they are frightened, right? They are just reacting, but they are not aware of why they are acting as they are acting. Yeah, it's true. So as you see, there's we can talk more about this. I mean, a lot more, but yeah, it's true. I mean, this. I was just thinking. I would like to say maybe. I mean, this was a nice word for the end, but I destroyed it already. You know, this was a very nice last word that you just said, but now I already destroyed it. So let me say something else quickly, please. I just wanted to add one thing. I agree or understand the position on this AOC for Alexandra Cortez, whatever it is, so Octavia Cortez. So it's not so big in Europe. We hear from her, but it's not a film. Anyway, so I understand what Barrett is saying, that she is basically scooping all the potential for progress, but by that affirming the system, right? So this is the idea. So she's scooping up the progress, the potential for progress, but using it to keep on powering the same system, so to speak. And in that sense, it's in that sense, I'm also convinced that this Yang should be more. He could even be more. I think many people believe in him. Actually, a Trump supporter from a friend of mine. A Christian Trump supporter or something. So he also decided now to support Yang because he sees some potential, beyond the system, so to say, in him. So maybe there's more potential in this guy, or in this movement at least, than we believe. But the point is, of course, the system is stronger than Yang and everything that he can come up with. So this is just one thing that I wanted to. I mean, from a European perspective, things better, but it's just my opinion. So the point is just, we need to see that some people are blocking us. We are already working on it. You know what I'm saying? Everybody's already working on it, but some people are also working on it. So there we are on a bifurcation point, basically. You can be aware of what you're working on. You know what I'm saying? You can work on it and go in this direction. You can work on it and go into the other direction.
Right.
So this is maybe what I'm trying to say here with this. Another thing I wanted to add, please, if I can do for 2 more minutes or something, about this new Pleroma, the new Pleroma coming. I was thinking maybe it would be interesting to think about how to implement this vision or this new Pleroma in the same way how Trump became a president. I mean, I'm simplifying now probably, but what was interesting about him was that, I think he said it even once, I think he said something like, even if I would go on the street and shoot a person, I would still become president or something like this, right? Because he produced a sort of self self-propelling mechanism where every resistance against him even more fired up the supporters. You know, everything you do against him fired up the supporters even more, you know, to support him, right, so to speak. So it would be interesting to see if there's a way to produce this vision, this pleroma, where every reaction of the former stress system doesn't fires it even more, you know, propels it even more, gives it even more power to, makes it even more real, you know what I'm saying? It makes it even more blow up. You see my point? So the idea is to transform this stress energy, which would be a reaction, which would try to kill this vision, so to speak, to transform it into even, you know, pumping it up like a balloon, so to speak, just like it happened with Trump. Every resistance, every classical resistance, right, from the media and so on, even made him stronger. Like whatever they tried to destroy him, you know, it was like in one of those Marvel superheroes, like one of the bad guys, when he's being attacked with forces, then he grows even bigger. You know, this was what happened with Trump. So the more you attacked him, the bigger he became, so to speak. He absorbed all the energy. And I was just wondering if, I mean, as I say, my simplification from the perspective of Europe, so I was wondering if this would be maybe an interesting question to think about, this vision, this pleroma, how to construct it so that every reaction of the stress, or, you know, every force, every power of the stress reaction pattern, so to speak, makes it even bigger and stronger and makes it even more convincing. You know what I'm saying? So this is because otherwise it will be always pushed away from the stress reactions if we keep in this picture, you know, in this metaphor, so to speak. Yeah. So this would be something that I would be interested in thinking about or investigating in the future.
Well, I think
I just decided, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think being creative is going to help do that. It's like if we look at this sort of visual culture behind, you know, mimetics and this kind of like repetition of signs and these kind of like jumblings of, you know, kind of making sense of these kind of like fragmentary signifiers and like being like, okay, so how do we do this and how do these things, how do they spread? I think that's kind of really interesting because, you know, Andrew Yang, ironically, kind of has the same mimetic hold as, you know, Trump did when, you know, people were making memes and doing that whole thing. And in a lot of ways, it's like, that speaks to people, you know, and like, so we can think about visual culture. We can think of the ways in which we relate to visual culture, which is almost kind of like, I would almost say memes is kind of like, it's like 2019. If we were to look at this kind of place we're in now, I could see in 100 years, they would see, well, this is kind of like our folk art, you know, this is kind of like our, you know, our like in our native plains drawings or our sort of like stalactite carvings, you know what I mean? It's kind of like this, it's kind of like a folk, you know, there's like folk artifacts almost. And I think that they actually have some sort of like very transcendent cultural power. And I'm not trying to say this as somebody who's like, thinks they're great or thinks they're all funny or something like that. But I do think that like, there is some sort of political power to them. And I think that we kind of have to take these things, and I know that they might be lowbrow. I know they might be kind of like jokey or stupid or this or that, you know, and we can, you know, say, oh, these aren't serious, but I mean, they have power. I mean, you talk to any 18-year-old, you know, this Generation Z or whatever, and it's like they almost live in a world of memes. I mean, they send them to their friends all day long.
Highly communicative.
It is, and it's a form of communication. And so we have to take these things like really seriously. And so at the end of the day, when you have people who are making these jokes and, you know, people say, well, you know, a lot of them are politically incorrect. That is because they're funny. And Hillary Clinton, you can't make something funny out of her. She's not funny. Like, it's like, there's like nothing. She doesn't have the content to create that spread because the avatar and the movement just doesn't exist in order to bring that into fruition. So I think if we look right now, it's funny how this like obscure guy comes out on this UBI platform and he says all this stuff, and you know, he goes on some talk shows and there's just memes with these money bags and like him with the sideways hat, and like, you know, it's making fun of people on the left, it's making fun of people on the right, it's making fun of all kinds of people, and it's just this like hilarious innocent joke. It's like these things have power because these kids, like when I walk down the street, I see an 18-year-old. It's like they know this, they speak a different language than me, and they're speaking this language already. It's almost ingratiated in how they socialize. And so it's like, for me to sit there and sit on, you know, be like, oh, well, you know, I do this and this and this, and I talk like this. It's like, no, I mean, there's a whole other world out there of communication, and like, I have to take that seriously. And these younger people, like I said, I'm young myself, but these people who are even 6 years younger than me, they speak a different language than me. Like,
I'm very amused by this, and I've heard this from younger friends of mine. I had a friend, he was 28 years old, and his girlfriend was like 23. And he said it sometimes it's like talking to someone from another generation, you know, 5 years younger than him. And you know, and I don't know that many teenagers, but I was in the gym the other day and I was hearing these two teenage boys talk, and they were very sophisticated, actually. They're talking about relationships and girlfriends and what's the right thing to do. And, she owes me an apology and I'm not going to put up with this. And one guy was talking about all of his regrets for the things that he did that he really regrets. 17 years old and he has all these regrets. And then later on that day, I'm in a bookstore and I'm listening to these two women who are just a few years older than these young men were. And I think they're first year of college, and they're talking about Xanax, Ativan, Prozac. I mean, they didn't talk about Prozac. They're talking about all these anti-anxiety drugs that they were on and that they'd experimented with and used, because both of them had trouble sleeping. And I went, oh my God, this is like old stuff, you know. Xanax and Ativan have been around for 50 years, and we know the effects of this long term are not good. But so I'm seeing young people who are mixed, very mixed, and I've also heard conversations from young people. I live in NYU and Columbia, and these kids are brilliant, you know, absolutely off the charts from any generation. You put them together with other people and they would be off the charts. So I just think it looks good and it looks terrible.
I think
I'm sure every generation has had that same thought.
Absolutely. The baby boomers certainly did, which I'm
could be. I think Barrett has a similar story about the think tank. Can you tell the story about the think tank guy?
oh, yeah. So I got asked to do some think tank with this young guy, and he's really bright guy. He's very smart. He's very sharp, you know. He's not a very good writer, though. But it's. I'm not going to get too into details because I hope he doesn't watch this. Really sharp guy, but it's funny because he has this idea like he's just going to get funding right off the bat. Like the interesting thing about these people who are like 21 years old is like they're like, okay, well, where's the money coming from? I need funding for this project, and there's this almost kind of like guileless. I don't want to say innocence, but there's like a willingness to sort of, because they've synthesized this information and they've read a lot of books and so they kind of look at at people who are older than them. They're like, well, I haven't synthesized as much a priori information because this is all the information I synthesize because this is the world I live in. I live in an inferential merit to that, I think. In some sense, it's not quite the same thing. But I think it's just kind of funny because it's like, I would never, the first thing that comes to my mind when I try to set out to do anything, the last thing on my mind is like, where am I going to get funding and where am I going to get money? Like, I have no idea. Like, it literally doesn't register to me this way. So I have this person there who's like, whoa, you're very young. You haven't experienced as much to be asking this kind of stuff, and like maybe this is like rude, and it absolutely doesn't resonate with this person. And it's like, but I'm gonna ask for more money, and I'm like, well, I wouldn't ask for it. It's like, so I think it's really strange. Like, I think it is this kind of strange thing, because in my mind, and in people who are older, they're just kind of like, well, this is kind of like odd, you know, this is like the first place he goes, you know, and it's like, so I don't know if I retold it correctly.
Yeah. Now, yeah, what I wanted to say is it's similar, right, to the Xanax thing, and it's similar to this. What did I regret? You know, what I regret in my life of 17 and stuff. So the point is, they are somehow taking up what adults do after a long time, right? Establishing a think tank with billions of money, right? Something like this. Talk about your life. Coming to the conclusion that Xanax maybe is the best thing for you, or something like this. You know what I'm so it's kind of a strange thing that this generation already has this like a module, whole lives as a module implemented for everyday use, so to speak, right? So today I'm going to make a think tank, you know, like this. So it's kind of a funny thing. It's a strange thing.
Well, in screen culture, things happen a lot faster than in print culture.
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah. So this is exactly this. So the screen culture is basically the abstraction of the print culture, right?
Right.
So you abstract everything that happened in print culture and do it as like a single module that you can implement next to other modules, right?
Right.
It's kind of an interesting shift. So what I'm saying is maybe there's more to that. It's not only the normal generational shift, you know, that the older generation thinks that the younger are different. I think it's a whole. It's different. It's something different. It's much stronger. It's a new type of human.
An intensification of
I would say a new type of human. Yeah, new type of human.
Almost.
Yes, I think so. I think there's I believe that if you've been brought up on flat screens, you're probably, your DNA is going to be different than someone who is raised without flat screens. I think there is even some evidence for that. So we're talking about, a different species. We may be splitting apart.
Well, that's what Socrates and Plato said when book learning and replaced memory in oral tradition, right?
And they were right too.
Gentlemen, I'm going to have to duck out of this very, very interesting conversation. Hoping to segue into the next time we talk, to Davor's point and also Barrett's point about being creative in order to bring the Pleroma. We're going to have to be creative by pulling in wisdom from the outside. So I could hope that sets up our next conversation. I really want to go into the four outsides.
Right. And we'll set up a page so we could create a forum, so we can add anything you want to write or riff on, and or post something, an article or a video that you think is useful. So I think this would be part of that conversation. So we can move from the written, we can move from the verbal, the face-to-face, old-fashioned face-to-face sort of, into a written kind of space. And then maybe our next event will be face-to-face again, and we can pursue it there, hopefully supporting one another. I think this is kind of a support group kind of thing, and I think there's something good about support groups where you just get together and sort of sponsor one another and articulating these really odd ideas, because we need we want to create the conditions where we can start making these bifurcation points, recognize them, and and it could be really wonderful. It could be really wonderful if it goes in a certain direction. So I think those affective zones, once you get those activated, they can really facilitate our movement. So I have to go too. It's getting late, and I'm sure it's really late for you, Davor. I really so much appreciate coming together like this.
Davor, thank you very much, Davor. I don't think your ideas are odd at all. I think they're very intriguing and interesting. So I'm going to continue to pursue this. Really enjoyed the article and the whole. So thank Cosmos for introducing me to your thought. I'm up for any other discussions or conversations about this that come up.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much. Yeah, and thank you for inviting me again. So I can, yeah, just tell me what happens in the future, and I can just easily, you know, how to say, switch in, how to say this, be back in, and you know.
Great. It will. If we have another call, we'll do it at an earlier time for you.
It
because
doesn't matter. Yeah, I will stay
Yeah,
in
I'll
this.
do-
It must be 2 o'clock there.
Yeah, that's normal in Berlin. People don't go to sleep to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Believe me, it's true.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah, I know you guys have a reputation for that.
okay.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
Thank you, everyone. Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
See you
Thanks.
guys.
Yep.
Bye.
See you, Barrett. All right. Good night, guys.
See you
Thanks.
next time.
Goodbye. Tschüss. So, do you turn it off? I'm turning it off. Okay, bye. See you. So, thanks. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.